But hi, my name's Peter Baumann, or Monk Anthony, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the 10 years of deep learning art, but I'm just going to talk about a tiny little slice of it today. And I'm the editor at Larandom, so a little digital art magazine where we look at mostly generativity and digital art. And this is what we're going to kind of be trying to answer today is how did modern AI art begin? So the AI art that we think of when we mostly hear the term AI art, which is a pretty imprecise term. And a little blurry, but when I mean modern AI art, what I mean is deep learning art. And so I mean that as a subsection of systems art, which is a subsection of it's a subsection of generative art, which is a subsection of systems art. And then it's also part of artificial intelligence art, part of machine learning, part of neural network art, and then deep learning. So that just means it uses neural networks, but it uses many layers of neural network. And so that's basically what the modern AI architecture is built on, as opposed to something like expert systems. So the question, and really the issue here with this art is that the history is still being written. And the history that has been written, like this is Tactical Engagements by Martin Zellinger. This is a really interesting book, but if you just look at the cover, it's Portrait of Edmund Bellamy from 2018. So there's the implication maybe that this is a really important work of GAN art. This art also sold in 2018 for about $500 million. And I guess my argument is that this work should not be on the cover and that there's a lot more important work that's a lot earlier that's basically overlooked. And so it's not just a problem with this Martin Zellinger book. So there's also Sophie and Audrey's Art in the Age of Machine Learning, which does a much better job, but also does not really tell the full story of deep learning art. And then there's Joanna Zelinska's AI art. Sorry, is it possible to refresh the slides? Maybe these, okay, the images are a little easier to see now. So yeah, again, this history is unwritten. These are three of the most common, or basically the three AI art books that have come out, and none of them really tell the full story or tell the story that I'm about to tell. And that is really, so like, yeah, again, going back to Portrait of Edmund Bellamy, that image goes back to Robbie Barrett and his DC GAN implementation that came from Sumit Chintala. So today, basically what I'm going to tell you about is the quick story of DC GANs and literally where that the Portrait of Edmund Bellamy came from in 2018. But the story starts in, quite a few years earlier. And how did that all start? How did that Portrait of Bellamy DC GAN image that sold for $500 million, where did it really begin? And why do I think that that should not have been on the cover of that book? So this is the guy actually who started and created DC GANs. He did it in 2015. His name is Alec Radford. Has anybody heard the name before? So maybe a few people. I've written about him and tweeted about him a bunch. I think he's a really fascinating character. I think he's probably the main character. He's certainly one of the main characters in deep learning art. And at the end of 2014, he was a college senior dropout. And he, at the end of this accelerator program, got some funding to create a machine learning company called Indico. And so his job at Indico was to make machine learning more accessible to developers. He was one of the only people in the world who understood deep learning and machine learning and was using it to solve business data problems. And he was one of the only people who could do it. But interestingly about Alec is what he ended up spending most of his time doing once he got that job was trying to make pretty pictures. So kind of not what you'd expect from this one of the world's machine learning experts at the age of like 21. So just a few weeks, literally about 3 weeks after he got his funding at Indico, he started tweeting some of the very first variational autoencoder art from January 2015. So this is arguably some of the first art that uses the latent space, if you include this as art. So this is really early examples on Twitter of VAE, and using VAE for some kind of creative purpose, not just for a research purpose. So VAEs had come out in 2013, and people like Tom White had experimented with them, and Alec Radford too, but this is one of the earliest implementations, January 25th and January 27th by Alec Radford. And then in July 12th, 2015, this is what Gene Kogan has called the first GAN art. This is probably the first GAN art. If you can just see, it has 14 likes on Twitter. So it's fairly obscure, like really, at the time no one knew about it. Still today, nobody really knows or cares about it. But this is Alec Radford from July 12, 2015, making progress, and his first reference to GAN art, General Adversarial Networks. And then a few months later, he makes another reference in September. So you can tell he's working on it. Again, he should be creating machine learning art, or he should be working on machine learning data solutions for business, but he's making this very obscure experimental art with VAEs and GANs, and he's one of the first or only people to be doing it. So September 16th is kind of the big breakthrough. This is when he releases something called The People Are in the Computer. This is kind of right before he releases the DC GAN paper. This is, I think, the culmination of his experiments with GANs. And then in November of 2015, so about a month later, he releases the DC GAN paper and makes it all public. And that reaches a certain number of people. So I call them the super spreaders. That's Tom White, Kyle McDonald, Gene Kogan, and Sumit Chinsala. So these are probably the 4 people that took those DC GAN ideas from Alec that he had just released about a few weeks earlier, and these are the people that actually spread it out. In particular, Gene Kogan. So Gene Kogan, just by December 2015, already had an art project using a GAN implementation. So just a couple months, just a month after DC GANs came out. And you can see that they all reference Alec Radford. So these are the people who started basically GAN art, especially Gene Kogan, and literally every single one of them is a reference to Alec. And why is Gene Kogan so important? Gene is the person who taught probably most of your favorite GAN artists, or who taught a lot of artists how to use GANs and how they could be used for creative applications. Obviously didn't teach everybody, but he was one of the first teachers. He started his teaching workshops for machine learning art in 2015, and GANs and style transfer and Deep Dream were the big motivators for those workshops. And then in 2016, just a few months later, was the Alt AI workshop and conference. It was one of the very first machine learning art exhibitions. And you can see some of, people like Mike Tyka, Alison Parrish, Mario Klingemann. This was organized by Gene at the School for Poetic Competition. So again, you can trace this really clear lineage from Alec to Gene to these workshops to Alt AI, but it starts with Alec. And that was basically how it got started, is those workshops and that Alt AI conference, and it continued to grow from there. These books, these 3 texts, or 3 full books on art and AI art history. Unfortunately, the Zellinger book doesn't even mention Gene or Alec, so come on, Martin. Sophian is by far the best book. It is very worthy of reading, but it does not mention Radford. And then, Joanna's book, also worth reading, also does not mention Alec. Oh yeah, and Alec Radford is also the inventor of ChatGPT. And he's also the inventor of Clip, which was basically the technology that enabled text to image. Clip combined with DALL-E version 2 is what kicked off text to image. Clip plus things like Big GAN and VQGAN is what kicked off text to image from like the artist hack level. So like, not only was he probably the first GAN artist, first arguably latent space artist, he was the inventor of ChatGPT. He was the main author of GPT's, OpenAI's GPT paper, and the main author of Clip, and a co-author of DALL-E. Sam Altman has called him genius at the level of Einstein. And that's my little story about Alec. So thank you for listening. If you want to learn more, this is an article that's a lot more about that story about Alec. And then I'm still writing more. I think there'll be more articles about him, but this is the main one that's out now. It's like 4,000 or 5,000 words, quite long. And then this is like the whole random editorials, and then a timeline about generative art history if you're interested in that too. So thank you guys very much. Thanks.